So how long does it take after a relapse to get your mojo back or to get your recovery momentum back? Today, we want to talk about what happens after a relapse and how to get back on track and heading in the right direction. Welcome aboard.
Ready?
When it comes to porn, are you stuck, spinning out, or slipping backwards in your life? If so, then welcome to the Finding Traction podcast, a show dedicated to those who are looking to gain recovery momentum away from porn and toward the life and relationships they have always hoped for. Now, here's your host, Vern Tomke.
Well, it's great to be back with you. If you're new to this podcast, and I do encourage you to leave a comment or to give it 5 stars. It just helps people find the podcast. But I also encourage you to pass it on to people that you know or may be struggling as well that may find this podcast helpful. But if you are new here or you have not yet signed up for Circle, if you take a look on the show notes, you will see that there's a link there that if you sign up for Circle, it's free to do so, and you can get access to a whole bunch of recovery materials. You can get access to a number of worksheets that help you in terms of intentionality towards your better future. And you also can watch the first couple lessons of the 52-week Finding Traction video course. There are people who do it by themselves. That's one way to do it. A better way is to do it with a couple friends that you know, maybe your accountability buddies. That's another way that guys use it. And I would say probably the best way is to do it in a group. And we are always starting up new groups for guys that want to get into a Finding Traction recovery group. And we meet weekly. We watch the video beforehand. It's only 15 or 20 minutes. And then we come with a worksheet done, ready to talk about how it applies to our lives. We share encouragement, we share hope for each other, and we also are connected throughout the week when we find ourselves running into trouble. It's a huge benefit for guys in their recovery. And we're going to make mention of that because I want to mention a few different group implications that happen around this topic, the idea of porn relapses, ripples, and reset. And anyone who has started down on this road away from embedded porn use will probably not experience a perfect track record in changing really what are deeply embedded habits. And it doesn't mean we should take a fatalistic approach to our recovery. Well, I know I'm going to screw up, so I might as well get it done with, or I'm never going to get over that. I tell guys that relapse is always possible, but it is never inevitable. And if we assume we will relapse rather than doing everything we can do to prevent it, I think that's just a defeatist way of thinking and does create a self-perpetuating cycle of failure in this area. But having said that, it is worth talking about what happens after a relapse when we know we've crossed all of our boundaries. And I want to talk about how to get back on track as soon as possible, or how to get out of the water. What do I mean by that? Well, I once heard a recovery saying, that went this way. You don't drown by falling in the water. You drown by staying in it. Well, I guess you could be treading water, so that isn't completely true, but maybe we should put it this way. You don't drown by falling in the water. You drown by staying under it. That's definitely true. Now, talking about water, let's start and use a word picture and talk involving water that kind of really helps describe for guys what happens, after a relapse. What are some of the unavoidable results? Now, let's just say you've been experiencing success for a considerable period of time. Now, we're going to liken the state of your life to a nice, deep pool of water. And that water has finally began to calm down. Now, this is what a relapse feels like. So in this picture, I want you to be, let's say you're up on a cliff above that deep, still pool of water of your life, and you grab the biggest boulder you can find and you chuck it into the pool. And lo and behold, what happens? Well, it creates this huge splash. And that's what happens when we relapse and we have this nice, serene pool of calm, peaceful water. So first of all, we have this big splash. And now what happens? Well, even after the rock disappears under the surface of the water, you are left with a series of ripples that expand out from the point of where the boulder went into the water, right? Now, assuming you don't continue to throw more boulders to follow that one, the ripples expand out, but over time, they become smaller and less pronounced. So you tracking with me here? So that's similar, and that's been helpful for guys when we use this word picture to describe the emotional ripples that follow a porn relapse. You had this event that happened. This big rock goes into the water, this big splash, but now you have these ripples. And those ripples could be things like maybe new compelling memories of new images or videos you've watched. And there's a part of that is the desire to go back and explore those videos, explore maybe the people in those videos in more detail. And it sits with you. But, and this is the good news, over time, usually after a few days, the intensity of those ripples began to decrease. Again, assuming that your relapse wasn't just the first event of a whole new phase or season of acting out. So it does beg the question, how can you ensure that one relapse doesn't turn into a whole new series of relapses, a phase, a stage? And that raises what I want to call a reset. Or how do we truly reset? I had a problem with this podcast because I couldn't get my speakers to work. So I did the typical Windows solution to most problems. I turned my computer off and turned it back on, and lo and behold, everything worked just fine. Somehow it reset some of the software or some of the things behind the scene, and I had a reset. My computer had a reset. It had a reboot. And that's really what we're asking here. How, even after a relapse, can we experience a true reset or a true reboot? So let's talk about why sometimes that doesn't happen. And often this is the first and biggest mistake we make. We either, one, try to cover it over as quickly as possible by pretending it didn't happen. Kind of reminds me of that neighbor's cat that's out in my, whenever it sees dirt in my lawn, it craps in it and then it covers it over immediately and then looks at me out the window like, I didn't do it. It's the neighbor's cat. I should throw something at it. But, we do that. We try to cover it over as quickly as possible, almost pretending that it never happened. Just get on with our day or just redouble our efforts or catch up with missed work. And a part of that oftentimes is we keep it to ourselves. When we practice either of those two strategies, it's almost certain that you will likely return to that relapse behavior. You haven't done a true reset. You fooled yourself by telling yourself that you were over it. I've had guys say, good example, well, I ended up acting out Saturday night. I felt horrible. The next morning I went to church and I was finally able to worship. I had communion and then I felt, okay, I feel better. And then I went back and guess what I did Sunday afternoon? I was back watching porn. See, that was a great example of where a true reset never happened. You were fooling yourself. You were hiding. You were covering it over. And really, it was still just below the surface of your behaviors. So I've heard this over and over again, and I recognize it because I've practiced it. I told myself, and one of the reasons why I think that it's so easy to fall into is because we tell ourselves immediately after that first relapse that we've learned our lesson, or we're so done with it. And we actually convince ourselves, okay, that was done with, but we've not truly reset ourselves. So how do we move past this ingrained tendency and truly turn a corner or do a proper reset to get back on the recovery path? Well, the answer is pretty simple. It's not easy, but it's pretty simple. We need to come clean. We need to tell somebody. Hopefully, for example, the same accountability buddies or the group that we set up when we were doing better, that we set up just in case something like this ever happened. We would have a group of guys to go to and do a reset with. When we tell somebody, we walk into the light. And when we do that, if we're in a good group, we have a good accountability guy. He doesn't just shame us, but what he does, or a good group, is we can now experience the encouragement and support that we need to ride out the ripples and get back to the very things that brought us success along the way. Another part of a reset is many of us also have preset agreements that we need to follow that also reinforce or cement our reset. For example, one of the rules that I have with my wife is this. We have a 24-hour rule. And our rule was and still is, if I relapse, then I will within 24 hours have a conversation with my wife. So that could be a part of your reset. But both of those are examples of coming out of the shadows and walking into the light. Another way that you also can reinforce a reset is following through on your negative reminders. Now, negative reminders, you'd have to go back and listen to an earlier podcast. Those are things you set up to give you a second pause before you act out. They're things that you say, if I act out, then I will also accompany that by these negative reminders that remind me this is not good for me. And sometimes the very negative reminders are the things that cause me to take a second think of, a second stop and go, no, I don't want to do this. And sometimes even more so than the fact that it's not good for me, it's the reminders I've set up. Some guys I know have done that around, coffee. I do that during football season around football. Excuse me. I, for example, did this negative reminder. It sounds goofy, but it really works for me, that I will forego all football on the weekends if I violate my boundaries. And sometimes it's just like, well, I love watching football. Well, I usually love watching football on the weekend. Not so much now, but I still like watching football on the weekend. And I know that if I violate my boundaries, that is part and parcel of the implications of what I have to walk out. Why I say I'm not so crazy about watching football is my Cowboys are playing so badly. I'm not sure why I want to reward myself with pain on the weekend, but I'm a sucker for punishment. And yes, Mr. Dobshoot, I did wear the Philadelphia Eagles hat for 3 groups when your Bears trounced my Cowboys. I'm surprised my head didn't break out in a rash. But all kidding aside, that helps me with my reset. It helps me know, okay, this is going to help me get back on track. Remind me the next time I'm tempted to act out, then I will also do this same negative reminder. The last thing I want to mention is just a practical thing, and I've said this many times, but it is worth saying, is I burn every bridge that I use to cross over the gap between my recovery and my acting out. So if Instagram was the culprit, or Facebook, or whatever it was, or you name it, I basically say for me to do a proper reset, I at the very least say, you know what, it's gone for a minimum of 30 days. And I'm just removing it, my access to it. I have the ability on Covenant Eyes just to put it on my block list, which it is on my block list. There's other ways, with screen time or other things, because if you've used that program or that app or that device to act out with, and you simply are now relying on good intentions, like, boy, I sure learned my lesson, I don't want to do that again, that's not going to stand you in good stead the next time you feel compelled to cross that bridge again. So if you're really going light on any of these areas, I would really suggest that you're not truly resetting. You're simply putting your recovery on hold, and it's only a matter of time before you cross that bridge, before you end up back in that same behavior. One of the most heartwarming things that I've experienced in our traction groups, and if you're listening to this, I really wish you could experience what the guys experience in our groups. And it really, I've had tears brought to my eyes as guys are sharing a difficult week, or, maybe when someone crossed their boundaries or relapsed, sometimes after a long spell of success. And they come to the group and there's just such a cloud on them. You can see the discouragement, you can see the pain, and they're devastated because it feels like all of their progress has been for naught, which is not true. But when you just have yourself, those lies in your mind just get magnified. But in the group, it's been so cool to see guys going, you know what? To whoever, maybe has relapsed or whatever, you're not at the beginning. Often saying to guys, especially guys that have been such an important part of the group, you have been such an encouragement to us. You know how to do this. Let's all recommit ourselves together to beat this with God's help and the support of each other. And that's been so cool, because I know when those guys are sharing and they're in that group and they're experiencing that love and support, they're truly experience a reset. And they're they really have learned and really are able to truly get back on the path and walk themselves into wide open spaces and freedom for their lives. So I hope that's helpful. And we will see you next time.